At 5:14 local time, the water ahead of the destroyer no longer looks like open sea. On the bridge, no one says the word minefield. They do not need to. Less than a mile off the bow, in the gray half-light before sunrise, dark shapes are moving with the swell. They are too low to be small boats, too evenly spaced to be random debris, and too deliberate to dismiss. The destroyer had been passing through the Strait of Hormuz under normal transit conditions. Course steady, speed controlled, every watch station doing exactly what it had been trained to do. The Gulf was calm enough. Visibility was not perfect, but it was usable. Nothing in the surface picture suggested that the next few minutes would matter this much. Then the forward lookout reported it. Bridge, possible floating objects bearing 086, multiple contacts low in the water. There is no panic, no raised voices, no dramatic reaction, just an instant change in the ship's posture. Inside the Combat Information Center, operators lean closer to their screens. Surface search updates come in. Electro-optical and infrared feeds are brought forward. Navigation overlays tighten. On the bridge, the officer of the deck looks through the glass at the dim water ahead, then back to the repeater display. The captain steps closer. His face does not change. Reduce speed, he says. Hold course. Verify. That is the first sign that this is not an ordinary contact report. A destroyer captain does not slow down in the Strait of Hormuz without a reason. Speed is control. Momentum is safety. Giving up either one means the ship has seen something ahead that can no longer be ignored. The wake shortens behind the ship. Engine noise drops slightly. Every eye on the bridge stays fixed forward. Then the camera finds the shapes. Round, dark, low in the water, barely visible until the swell lifts them for a second at a time. One, then another farther off the port side. They are not drifting like trash. They are sitting in a pattern. The spacing is not guesswork. It has structure, geometry, intent. In CIC, a tactical action officer compares the positions against known deployment behavior. The answer is not comforting. These are not buoys, he says. No one replies. No one has to. The destroyer is no longer looking at open water. It is looking at a decision point. A few seconds later, another layer appears. Two small Iranian boats show up on the edge of the surface picture. They are still distant. They are not rushing in. They are not closing aggressively. They are simply there, offset from the destroyer, watching from exactly the kind of position that is visible enough to send a message and distant enough to remain deniable. That is worse. One floating object could be debris. Two could be coincidence. But a line of dark contacts placed ahead of a U.S. destroyer while Iranian craft linger nearby is something different. Then the radio crackles. U.S. warship, alter course immediately. Unsafe waters ahead. The voice is calm, clear, and controlled. The English is clean enough to be understood immediately with just enough accent to place the source. There is no distress in it, no confusion, no attempt to hide who is speaking. On the bridge, heads turn toward the handset, then back toward the water. The warning has come too late, and it has come too clean. That matters. Real maritime safety calls are messy. They come early, they repeat. Sometimes they sound rushed. Sometimes they sound irritated. This one arrives at the exact moment the destroyer has already identified the hazard for itself. Not before, not long after. Right on cue. The captain understands what that means. Someone is not trying to save the destroyer from what is ahead. Someone is trying to influence where the destroyer goes next. Maintain present heading, he says. No course changes until we have the full picture. That order defines the entire moment. Ow! The danger is no longer only what sits in the water ahead. The real danger is being pushed into a fast turn without knowing what is waiting off either beam. In the low light, another dark object rolls into view. This one is closer than the first estimate suggested. The navigator checks the depth. CIC updates range. The bridge team recalculates closure. Too close for comfort. Still far enough to manage, but only if nobody guesses wrong. Behind the bridge windows, dawn has still not fully arrived. The sea remains a sheet of dull steel, broken only by the slow rise of black shapes that should not be there. Each one sends the same silent message. Keep moving blindly, and the ship may not leave this place the same way it entered. The Iranian boats hold their distance. The radio goes quiet. Inside the destroyer, the mood is not fear, it is compression. Every station tightens around one shared fact. The ship has entered a space where one wrong rudder order could do the other side's work for them. An officer studying the electro-optical feed says what the rest of the crew is already beginning to understand. This does not look random, he says. This looks placed. Placed, not scattered, not old, not forgotten. Ahead of the destroyer is not just a hazard. It is a shaped problem, a corridor of pressure, a set of choices someone wants the ship to make while time, stress, and uncertainty are closing in. The captain stands still for another second, watching the contact line rise and fall in the gray water. At this point, the destroyer is no longer simply sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. It is being guided into a decision. At 5:16 local time, the destroyer is no longer just moving through dangerous water. It is holding itself together inside a problem that appears to have been built on purpose. Speed comes back another notch. Not enough to surrender control, just enough to buy thought. On the bridge, the helm responds in fractions, not turns. Below in Combat Information Center, the tactical picture sharpens second by second. Surface search, camera feed, navigation overlays, sonar, electronic warfare. Every system begins collapsing toward one hard truth. The black objects ahead are only the first layer. "Bring the helo up," the captain says. The order moves through the ship fast. A Seahawk helicopter had already been on short notice readiness. Now short notice is over. On the flight deck, tie-down chains come off. Rotor blades unlock. Crew chiefs move quickly without looking rushed, because this is exactly what training is for. Moments when the sea stops being background and becomes the problem. Above the destroyer, the first thin light of dawn spreads across the Gulf, turning the water the color of cold metal. As the MH-60R lifts clear and banks forward, the bridge crew watches it move into the gray. If the surface picture is hiding something, the air picture may reveal it. If there is a path through the water ahead, the helicopter will see it first. Inside CIC, the electronic warfare operator raises a hand. New emissions from shore. Intermittent surface search profile. Nobody says Iran. Nobody needs to. The coastline is close enough to matter now, but still far enough away to complicate everything. The destroyer is boxed between what sits in the water and what may already be watching from land. The radio crackles again. U.S. warship, alter south immediately, unsafe defensive waters ahead. The wording has changed. Not just unsafe waters now, defensive waters. That is not a warning anymore. That is pressure dressed up as procedure. On the bridge, the captain listens without expression. "Log it," he says. Out ahead, the Seahawk's sensors begin feeding clean imagery back to the ship. What looked from sea level like a loose string of floating objects now resolves into something worse from above. The contacts are not scattered in a natural drift pattern. They form a partial belt, curved just enough to shape movement. Not a wall, a funnel. Then the aircrew spots the most dangerous detail yet. There are gaps. 2 possible lanes, the sensor operator reports. Repeat, 2 openings in the line. That should feel like relief. It does not. One opening lies farther north. It is narrow, uneven, and uncomfortable, with several contacts sitting just outside it like teeth around a jaw. The other lies farther south, wider, easier to see, almost inviting. The kind of lane a stressed bridge team might choose if it felt forced to turn quickly. The pilot circles once more. The sensor operator tightens the image. The southern gap shows something else. A faint wake line. Older, but still visible. Somebody has passed through there recently, or somebody wanted it to look that way. In CIC, the mine warfare-trained watch officer leans in. "That is too clean," he says. "Could be a deception lane." That changes the atmosphere instantly. A field of sea hazards is one problem. A field designed to offer the wrong escape route is another. The destroyer barely holds course. Ahead, the floating contacts rise and fall in the swell with quiet patience. Off the starboard edge of the surface picture, the 2 Iranian boats begin to move again. Not fast, not aggressively, just enough to reposition with the ship. Shepherding, not chasing. And that word hangs over everything. The bridge now understands the logic. The objects in the water do not have to block every yard of sea. They only have to deny enough space to influence the rudder. The boats do not need to close in. They only need to exist where the destroyer can see them. The voice on the radio does not need to convince anyone. It only needs to add pressure to the choice. This is lane denial, coercion by geometry. "Captain," the navigator says quietly, "recommend no hard turns south." He does not say trap. He does not need to. Another call comes in from the helicopter. Possible moored object beyond the southern lane, bearing 094 from the ship. Partially submerged, not consistent with random debris. That is the second blow. Even if the southern opening is real, something may be waiting beyond it. A second stage contact, a decoy. A hidden problem meant to force one more correction after entry. In other words, the exit may only be the next part of the design. The captain answers in the same tone he has used from the start. No heat, no rush. "If they want us turning fast," he says, "we turn slow. If they want us blind, we map everything." That becomes the ship's posture. On the bridge, the destroyer steadies. In the helicopter, the crew keeps circling. In CIC, every contact is marked, numbered, and fed into the tactical picture. Nobody is chasing certainty anymore. They are building it. Then one last image comes back from the Seahawk, sharp enough to end the argument. On one of the nearest black objects, just visible above the waterline, the camera catches a tether angle and a brief glint of metal beneath the swell, anchored, placed, deliberate. The destroyer is not trapped by the objects alone. It is trapped by the choices those objects were designed to force. At 5:19 local time, the destroyer stops trying to outrun the situation and starts dissecting it. That shift is everything. A nervous ship makes speed. A disciplined ship makes measurements. And right now, discipline is the only thing keeping steel away from steel and the hull away from hidden danger. On the bridge, the captain gives an order that no one outside the Navy would ever recognize as a counterplay. Maintain minimal headway. Helm answers in single degrees only. No hard rudder, no sudden swing to port, no desperate break south. The destroyer keeps only enough motion through the water to maintain steerage. Nothing more. In tight water under pressure, too much movement becomes risk. Too little movement becomes drift. What the crew needs now is control measured in inches, not yards. Inside Combat Information Center, every station is locked into the same picture. Surface contacts, mine-like objects, helicopter feed, shore emissions, depth data, current estimates. Nothing exists alone anymore. Every screen is now part of one question. Where can a U.S. destroyer move without giving the other side exactly what it wants? Above them, the Seahawk circles again, careful and methodical. The aircraft stays outside the immediate hazard while its sensors do the risky work. From altitude, the pattern below begins to look less like chaos and more like design. The northern lane is tighter than it first appeared, but its spacing is irregular in a way that matters. Messy, uncomfortable, harder to sell as a safe passage. And because of that, more believable. The southern gap is still too clean. That detail keeps returning. A trap does not always hide itself. Sometimes it advertises the wrong answer. Recommend we disregard the southern lane, the Mine Warfare Watch officer says. It looks built to attract a fast correction. The captain nods once. Agreed. Off the starboard side, one of the Iranian fast boats increases speed. Not enough to close dangerously. Just enough to shift position ahead of the destroyer's beam. Its weight cuts white against the gray water, then fades. The second boat lingers farther back, offset like insurance. They are not attacking, they are shaping. That is the key difference, and everyone on the ship can feel it. These boats are not there to win a direct fight with an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. They are there to occupy attention, influence movement, and turn seconds into pressure. In waters like these, pressure is its own tool. The radio snaps alive again. U.S. warship, alter course south. You are now entering restricted defensive waters. No response comes from the destroyer. Silence in that moment is not hesitation. It is refusal. The U.S. ship will not let the voice on the radio set the rhythm of the bridge. Instead, the navigator studies depth contours while the conning officer checks the distance to the nearest anchored contact. The helmsman waits with both hands steady, ready for corrections so small they barely qualify as turns. The lee helmsman manages engine output in tiny increments. Somewhere below, machinery hums with restrained force. A warship is deliberately choosing patience over instinct. Then the helicopter crew finds another problem. Bridge helo, new contact in the water, bearing 089. Low profile, possibly semi-submerged, drifting slightly with current. A new black shape appears on the feed, and it appears in exactly the wrong place. It is not directly in the original line. It is not far enough away to ignore. It sits just ahead, just offset from the pattern, close enough to complicate the northern lane that only moments ago it started to look possible. Not part of the first obvious belt, something else. Maybe a decoy, maybe a real anchored contact shifted by tide, maybe a loose object placed there for one reason only, to add uncertainty at the exact moment uncertainty could become more dangerous than the object itself. On the bridge, the tactical action officer says what everyone is already thinking. They do not need every contact to be real. They just need enough of them to own our rudder. That is the trap in its purest form, not control through force. Control through hesitation. Control through geometry. Control through making a trained bridge team question every safe-looking yard of water in front of them. The destroyer edges forward another fraction. 1 degree right, hold, 5 seconds. 1 degree left, hold. Every correction is checked against the helicopter feed before it becomes movement. Every small shift of the bow has to be earned. Nothing is casual anymore. Nothing is automatic. A single degree now carries more weight than a full turn would on open sea. The crew on the weather decks can see some of the dark contacts with the naked eye now. No screen, no magnification, no sensor interpretation, just black metal shapes rising out of the swell and disappearing again, close enough to feel personal. One sailor watches a contact slide slowly down the port side, no farther away than a bad decision. Another keeps staring at the surface as if the water itself might change shape at any second. Nobody speaks unless they have something worth saying. The captain finally breaks the quiet. "No dramatic moves," he says. "We survived this by inches." The line settles over the bridge like ballast. It is not meant to inspire anyone. It is not a speech. It is not theater. It is technical truth reduced to its simplest form: inches. That is the margin now. Minutes pass, but on board the ship they do not feel like minutes. They feel like individual hell mortars stitched together by discipline. A correction, a pause, a sensor check, a bearing update, a breath held and released only after the ship answers correctly. Ahead, the northern lane begins to resolve. Narrow, imperfect, uncomfortable, but possible. The Seahawk banks again, its sensors refining the path from above. A set of reference points is passed down to the ship. Relative bearings, safe-looking water, known contacts on either side, nothing guaranteed, nothing clean, just the best route available to a destroyer that refuses to be rushed. Then, just as the bow starts to line up on that thin thread of open water, one of the Iranian fast craft changes behavior. Its nose comes around, its speed builds. In CIC, a new report cuts through the air. Possible additional contacts in the water ahead. The lane out may be real, or it may be the final layer of the design. At 5:23 local time, the destroyer commits to the narrow lane. Not fast, not smoothly, not with comfort. It commits because every other option is worse. On the bridge, the bow inches toward a strip of water that looks barely wide enough for error and far too narrow for confidence. To port, anchored contacts rise and vanish in the swell. To starboard, more dark shapes sit low and patient, their spacing too exact to ignore. Between them is a corridor just wide enough to invite a mistake. The helmsman makes the correction. Right 1 degree. A pause. Right 1 degree. The destroyer answers slowly, its mass shifting with controlled reluctance. Below, the engines hold the ship at minimal headway. Too much thrust could widen the turn. Too little could let the current start making decisions for them. Overhead, the Seahawk tightens its orbit, feeding live video back into CIC. From altitude, the lane is visible, but only barely. A pale ribbon between black points. A route measured more by what is absent than by what is safe. Then, Iran moves. The fast craft that had been trailing offset from the starboard side suddenly increases speed. Its bow rises. Spray kicks out wide behind it. It is not trying to collide. It does not need to. It only needs to appear where it can force attention at the exact wrong second. Starboard contact accelerating, CIC reports. Closing angle shallow, possible interference. That gets everyone's attention because interference is enough. The destroyer cannot simply swing away from a fast boat. Not here. Not with dark contacts sitting under the next possible turn. The boat knows that. That is why it came forward at this exact moment. The radio comes alive again, sharper this time. U.S. warship, alter immediately, alter immediately. There is no calm procedural tone now. No attempt to sound like a routine maritime warning. This is pressure time to match the most delicate phase of the transit. On the bridge, the captain does not answer the radio. He answers the boat. Train the forward mount. The forward defensive system shifts just a few degrees. Not wild, not excessive. Just enough to be unmistakable. A message made of steel and angle. The remote stations come online. Watch teams lock in. Nobody escalates, nobody rushes. Nobody lets the moment control their hands. Above the water, the Seahawk drops lower. It comes in fast over the Iranian craft. Low enough for rotor wash to flatten the surface around it. Low enough for everyone on that boat to understand they are being seen clearly. The helicopter does not strike. It does something more useful. It removes ambiguity. Its camera pod looks straight down. Its markings are visible. Its orbit is deliberate. It tells the fast craft, the coast, and anyone else watching the same thing. You are now part of the record. For a moment, the boat keeps coming. Then the bridge receives the report nobody wanted. Mine-like contact shifting starboard, bearing 091, close. A dark object near the starboard edge of the lane rolls hard with the wake pattern and tide, drifting just enough to matter. On the bridge wing, one lookout can now see it without optics. Black surface, wet metal, low profile, too close to the hull for comfort. If the destroyer overcorrects away from it, it risks the contacts to port. If it holds steady and the object continues to drift, there may not be time for another adjustment. This is the moment the trap was built for. Pressure from the boat, pressure from the radio, pressure from the water itself. Hold the lane, the captain says. No extra words, no emotional edge, just the order. The helmsman does exactly that. Hands steady, breathing shallow, a fraction left. Hold. Wait. Check the drift. The conning officer watches the bow as if focus alone could pull the ship clear. In CIC, nobody looks away from the screens. The object rises on a swell. For 1 second, it looks close enough to touch. Then, the hull slides past. No shock through the deck, no sudden column of water, no violent break in the ship's rhythm. Only a long, grinding silence as the destroyer survives a moment that was never supposed to feel calm. The Iranian fast craft sees it too. Its speed drops first. Then its bow angle changes. Not much, but enough to show hesitation. The second Iranian boat farther back never fully commits at all. Offshore, the destroyer's electronic warfare team notices another shift. Shore-based emissions begin to thin. The radar sweeps become less frequent. The pressure is still present, but the timing is starting to slip. That is the first sign the trap is failing. The destroyer keeps going. Still inside the lane. Still moving as if every foot of water must be negotiated with mathematics and nerve. Another contact slips past the port side, then another. Farther ahead, the water begins to open by degrees. Not safe, not yet, but wider, cleaner, less controlled. The captain finally keys the radio. Unsafe interference with a United States warship is being recorded. The transmission is short, level, and cold. No threats, no drama, just a line drawn in plain language. This time, no answer comes back. At 5:31 local time, the destroyer is nearly through the worst of it. Nearly. Ahead, beyond the last visible cluster of anchored contacts, open water begins to emerge in the dawn light. Behind and off the beam, the Iranian fast craft are slowing. Their movements no longer shape the ship's decisions. Now they only observe. But nobody on the destroyer confuses almost with finished. After nearly an hour of precision under pressure, one truth still remains. The ship is almost clear, and at sea, almost can be the most dangerous word of all. At 5:34 local time, the destroyer's bow finally clears the last line of black shapes. No one on the bridge celebrates. Not yet. Ahead, the water opens into a broader sheet of gray-blue dawn. Smoother, cleaner, no longer broken by the deliberate rhythm of dark contacts rising with the swell. Astern, the belt begins to fall away into distance. Still visible in broken patches through the morning haze. Still dangerous. Still sitting exactly where someone wanted it to be. But the destroyer is no longer inside it. Steady on course, the captain says. The order comes out flat, controlled, almost quiet. That is the sound of a ship surviving professionally. Engine output comes up a fraction, not a burst. Not a dramatic surge. Just enough to widen the distance between the steel hull and the geometry behind it. On the bridge, officers continue scanning the water ahead, then checking the tactical repeater, then scanning again. In CIC, nobody allows relief to take over. Relief is how a second danger gets missed. The rule now is simple. Clear does not mean safe. Above them, the Seahawk holds station and turns back over the hazard area. What had been a survival problem 5 minutes earlier is now an intelligence target. The helicopter's sensors sweep the contact line from end to end. Each dark object is marked, time-stamped, and mapped. The southern lane, the one that had looked so inviting from a distance, is imaged again from multiple angles. The faint wake signature inside it is still there. But now, without the pressure of immediate transit, the deception is easier to read. It does not look like chance anymore. It looks curated. That matters because once a trap is understood, it stops being only a threat. It becomes evidence. Inside CIC, the tactical picture grows cleaner by the minute. The contacts are numbered, bearings are frozen, drift is calculated. The semi-submerged object beyond the southern opening is logged with precise position and estimated depth. The shore-based radar activity that had surged during the transit is matched against the timeline of the radio calls and the movement of the fast craft. Nothing had been random, not the warnings, not the pressure, not the timing. The ship now has the full shape of it. Iran had not simply placed hazards in open water. It had used a belt of anchored contacts to shape decision-making. It had used small craft to create visual pressure. It had used radio warnings to inject urgency at the exact moment the destroyer needed patience most. And somewhere along that chain, someone had assumed a U.S. destroyer under stress would do what many ships do under stress. Turn too quickly. Guess. Break rhythm. Let pressure become command. It never happened. One of the lookouts on the bridge watches the dark shapes slide farther astern and says nothing. He does not need to. Everyone up there knows how narrow the margins were. A few degrees the wrong way, a little too much throttle. A reaction to the boat instead of the water. Any one of those could have changed the entire morning in the Strait of Hormuz. Instead, the destroyer is still underway. Intact, controlled, and now more dangerous in a different way. Because survival was only the first outcome. The second is what the ship takes with it. The helicopter transmits another set of images. One contact shows a clear tether angle. Another reveals metal patterns inconsistent with long-term drifting. A third sits almost perfectly positioned to influence a northbound transit. The belt is no longer just a danger on a screen. It is a layout, a method, a signature. The fast craft remain in the distance, but their role has changed too. Earlier, they were part of the pressure structure. Now they are tracks in the system, recorded and boxed inside the destroyer's logs. Their acceleration points are captured. Their station changes are captured. Their relative headings are captured. So are the shore emissions. So are the radio calls. So is the exact minute the pressure started to collapse. That may be the real cost to Iran. Not simply that the destroyer escaped, but that the plan failed without producing the reaction it was built to trigger. And by failing, it revealed itself. The captain studies the forward horizon for another moment, then turns slightly towards CIC. Continue collection, he says. I want the whole pattern. That line explains what really happened here. This was never going to end with cheering on the bridge. It was never going to end with some dramatic response into the dawn. That is not how a professional navy proves control. Control is leaving the danger area with the ship intact. Control is protecting the crew. Control is refusing to let the other side choose your rhythm. Control is carrying away a complete picture of how the pressure was built, how it was applied, and how it can be defeated next time. By 5:42, the destroyer is making steady water again. The hazard belt is behind it. The Iranian boats are no longer affecting its course. Shore activity has faded into the background. On the surface, the sea looks ordinary once more. But it is not ordinary anymore, because a few miles astern sits the remains of a failed trap. And inside the destroyer's system sits something even more valuable. A map of the pattern, a timeline of the pressure, a record of every choice the other side tried to force. Iran tried to make the sea itself into the problem. The destroyer turned the problem into a map.